Services group, I'd like to welcome you to our fall semester eTeaching faculty luncheon. I'm Sarah Casterham. I'm one of the group's instructional designers and also filling in for Jeannie Poe as the interim associate director while she is on maternity leave. I'd also like to thank Terry Palucci, where's Terry, for her help in organizing today and providing the lunches that we're all enjoying. So thank you for coming out on this cold day to hear about the first year writing seminar, Faculty Lounge, a teaching resource repository. We're excited about this project and very much appreciate the chance that our presenters are giving us to all see it. So I'd like to introduce them, although introductions are perhaps hardly necessary. Vlad Tobin is Associate Professor in the English Department, author of numerous publications on composition theory and the teaching of writing, especially ways of reading and responding to student writing. He's been a faculty member at the Martha's Vineyard Summer Institute on the Teaching of Writing and serves on the editorial boards of a number of journals. The Fourth Genre, the journal in creative nonfiction, the journal Pedagogy, and the monograph series, Studies in Writing and Rhetoric. He's also director of the First Year Writing Seminar Project and has been very involved in leading the development of this project. Rico Soko also teaches in the First Year Writing Seminar program and has been very much involved in developing the site. He holds an MFA from the Bennington Writing Seminars, and his fiction in journalism appeared in a number of journals, including the North American Review, the Boston Phoenix, and the Boston Globe. Flyweight Literary Review, InfoPlease.com, and anthologies such as Generation Q. In 1998, he was selected to be a Penn New England Discovery Writer, and he has received fellowships and awards for his writing from the LEF Foundation, the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and the Institute of Asian American Studies at Cal State University, Los Angeles. And they are joined by Tim Lindgren, an instructional designer on our eTeaching staff, and also a PhD candidate in the English department, where his dissertation research focuses on blogging and how writers use new media to foster a sense of place. And he has worked with them on developing this project, so we're delighted to welcome them and ask them to present the project. Thanks.
So I'm Vlad Tobin. Thank you, sir, for the introduction and for helping to organize this event. Thanks to Instructional Design for giving us the grant and all the support that they've given us to this point. Also, thanks for sharing Tim Lindgren and Jeannie Poe with us, or maybe you should be thanking us for sharing them. They started in the English department. They're both doctoral candidates in our department, enormously talented ones, so we are happy to still have some relationship with them as they go into instructional design. I'll talk briefly about why we applied for grant funding and also about the nature of the first year program and why we think it makes sense to develop the sort of website that we have. The first year writing program offers a course, a seminar that's a required course for BC students. Typically, in a typical year, about 1,800 students take the course out of the 2,300 or so students. The others are exempted with an AP credit, but still 1,800 is more than enough to teach, and we have about 60 faculty a year teaching. That group is made up of about 30 to 35, sometimes even 40 new teachers each year. So an enormous percentage every year of our faculty turns over. About 30 are graduate students, and then we have a fair amount of turnover in the adjunct part of the faculty. Very few tenure track faculty have taught in the first year writing program for a number of years. And so it means that we're relatively unstable. We have, of those 30 to 35 new teachers who are new to the program, I'd say about 90% are new to any teaching, any sort of teaching at all. And so it meant that we had a kind of desperate need to offer preliminary and ongoing evolving faculty development and supervision and training. And we tried to do that in the past with a lot of mentoring, a lot of small group meetings, and a lot of staff meetings. So we continued to use those, but we found that they weren't, those methods of support were insufficient for a lot of reasons. One was it just wasn't the best use of the time of the administrators to answer the same questions again and again and again. We had 30 new teachers, 25 might come and ask me in the first 2 weeks, what do you do when this happens? And then this might be the question that I just answered 4 or 5 times before. So not only did it mean that it wasn't the most efficient use of the time of the administrators in the program, but it also meant that they weren't benefiting from conversations with peers about the same questions or problems. Also, we'll talk a lot about this. Teachers were developing great syllabi and exercises and assignments that they would use in 1 year of teaching and then leave BC the very next year. And so we were losing out on a potential archive of really valuable material. And again, given our particular circumstances, that most of the teachers were new from year to year to teaching, as well as to the FWS program, that was a serious loss, because those teachers were sort of scrambling again to find out, what do you do when you want to teach argument? Or what do you do when a student has disappeared for 2 weeks from your class? Or what do you do when a student challenges a grade? Actually, almost anything about teaching that you could imagine as now seeming relatively familiar to you was unfamiliar to this core of teachers. And so, again, it made us particularly well suited to developing a website that had those answers at the immediate access of faculty at any day of the week or hour of the night when they couldn't see an administrator and say, what do I do in this situation? And so that led all of those material conditions of having a very large staff, a relatively inexperienced staff, and a staff with a huge amount of turnover, led us to want to develop a site that included an archive of teaching materials, an evolving dynamic archive. So if somebody taught a great class on Monday, she could make information about that class available by Monday night, and somebody desperate for something to do on Tuesday might actually say, I can borrow or adapt this for my next class. It also meant that if a teacher new to BC, or even a teacher not so new to BC, ran into a problem that she hadn't encountered before, that she'd have access to department, program, and university guidelines that might help answer that question, a kind of very extensive FAQ page. It also meant that we wanted a list of people who we have come to think of a little bit as support services to the FWS program. I don't think any of these people would define their job as I'm working in support services to the FWS program. These are all people with separate important jobs on campus. Quasi Sarkey Mensa, for example, in reference division at O'Neill, or Tom McGinnis, who runs counseling services, or Sue Barrett in the Connors Family Center. But from our perspective, those are really important support people for our faculty to know and to know about. And so we should talk a little bit in a minute about how we've tried to integrate information about people on campus who new teachers should know into the site. And finally, and this is the last thing I'll say for this moment, and I'll come back once we start showing you the site, we wanted to create a community of teachers. We had done a fair amount of thinking in this program about what uses of digital technologies we wanted to make in our pedagogy. We thought a fair amount about how we could train new teachers to use new media and digital technology in innovative ways in designing the course, in creating classroom discussion. We've done a fair amount with WebCT in that regard. But we had done very little with community building for the faculty. So when we applied for the grant, we weren't interested at this stage in working more for the time being on what we could do in the classroom with new media and digital technology, because as I said, we'd already done a fair amount of that, but we saw a more pressing need to create community for the faculty or teaching for the reasons I said before. And so the community building part led us to the idea that we wanted a kind of virtual teachers lounge, an ongoing faculty forum where teachers could raise little or big questions at any point in the semester or in training, because the site would also be made available to that group of, I mentioned before, the 30 graduate students who have never taught before and have certainly never taught the course before. We require those students to take a course in pedagogical theory the year before they begin teaching. But as you can imagine, there are all sorts of questions they don't even know to ask They don't know what they don't know yet until they get into the classroom. So we wanted a site where faculty could talk to each other at the spur of the moment about what's going on in their class, either to raise a question or to commiserate or to vent or to celebrate what's happening in teaching. And so we worked pretty hard to try to create a virtual community of teachers, with the idea being that that'll have profound impact on their effectiveness in the classroom. I'm going to turn it over for a minute to Tim and Rico, and I'll come back once we start talking about specific aspects of the site we've already developed.
So I think a lot of what Lad's been talking about are it's the proverbial water cooler, where people are talking informally in the department about what they're doing, and these conversations are really important, both in exchanging actual sort of teaching resources of various kinds, but also for the relationships that happen and the social networking that happens as that goes on. Of course, we don't look like this in the English department. We look maybe something more like this. But in any case, that we talk about this as lore, as the kind of information that's circulated in informal ways, but is really crucial for how we think about teaching and how the kinds of practices we adopt in our everyday teaching. And it's also about social networking, which we hear a lot about these days from Facebook and other kinds of social networking sites. And we're not trying to set up a Facebook-like site, but we are looking for ways to make connections between teachers and this sort of extra layer of interactions. Facebook doesn't replace the traditional kinds of sociability that happens in the college dorms and so forth. It just adds another layer very seamlessly for people to connect and find people and start relationships and maintain relationships. And so we wanted to think about some ways that this site could also do that for the first year writing program and create a kind of continuity between different years of instructors. And this isn't something that is absolutely necessary for the program to work, but I think it is more and more important, especially with this particular program, where the kind of social networks you form. You only have a year to teach if you're a teaching fellow. A lot of things have to happen quickly for you to feel comfortable in the program and understanding what you're doing. And we don't want people to disappear and drop off. So people can disappear in the program pretty easily, and we want them to feel connected and have resources to be able to figure out, both from the site, what kinds of things they can do and who else they might talk to about it. If they want to do a place-based course, who they talk to. The site should point them to some people in the department who might be able to help them with that. So I want to go out to the site for a few minutes and just walk around it a bit. And for starters, there are sort of three main sections of the site. And in the middle here we have the teaching resources, which is sort of the stuff of teaching that we're trying to gather because it disappears from year to year, and we want to get the best stuff from the new instructors as they come up with their innovative Jeopardy game for grammar that goes with them when they leave. And we also want to have that available as a kind of source of conversation. So it's not just digital objects as teaching resources, but also the conversations that happen as somebody goes in and is able to comment on any of these teaching resources. So somebody could submit it, another person could come in and say, by the way, I use this, it actually takes 25 minutes, not 10 minutes as listed, and you might also want to try it with this other essay. So there could be another layer of conversation that goes on around those objects. They're not just static, they're sort of evolving as time goes on, and that conversation is as valuable as the original teaching resource. So the teaching resources section lists what's there, and you can filter by categories and search for teaching resources as well. The faculty forum, Rico talked about a little bit.
I just wanted to mention a little bit about these three parts. There's, you can sort of see visual, can you go back? So we had a lot of discussions in the beginning of developing the site, even before we brought in Bill, before we brought in the back end people to do the technical work. of how would we lay out the site. A lot of what Lad talked about, our needs are very diverse. So you see these three in terms of the program handbook, the teaching resources, the faculty forum. Took several, discussions, ongoing conversation about how we would divide it up. The teaching resources that Tim just talked about is more static. Someone puts a great assignment up for other people to use, or we would look through here for an assignment on how do I teach audience. So that's what teaching resources is. Faculty forum, I work on the web but not PowerPoint. Faculty forum is more of an interactive place for teachers to exchange with each other. Like, I have this question, my classroom discussions are very limp and I do all the talking. What do you do to get your students motivated? So we might ask a question, like if you look at the top, I don't know how well you can see this, but the new forum topics, the first thing that says, things I plan to change in my new syllabus. Lad just asked this question and put it out there on the website a few days ago. And we started to get responses from other teachers saying, this feminist reading didn't work so well, and I'm going to aim more to revise it next semester for this. So it's doing a lot of work that you might be doing on a listserv through emails that everybody would get, but it doesn't necessarily clog up everyone's mailboxes. So I like to think of the site sort of like an iPhone, because everything on the iPhone was out there. It was just in your Palm Pilot and your telephone and your iPod, but your iPhone combined it all. That's sort of what our site is doing. It was, there was a listserv here, there was conversations going on in the hallways of Carnegie Hall, there were individual mentoring going on, and hopefully the Teacher's Lounge combines all those sort of like an iPhone. I don't know if we're going to walk through each.
Maybe, could you go back for a second to the page with all three? I want to say a quick thing about design. We spent a great deal of time talking about what we wanted the site to look like, how we wanted it to feel to people coming in. And those conversations got us thinking about fundamental goals, how much we were trying to, going back to what I was saying before, create a community, how much it was going to look like a sort of official VC site. We were interested in creating some space that clearly was part of BC professional life, but also was one in which teachers would feel comfortable coming to talk with each other, sometimes about problems in their teaching, with some feeling that they were in a somewhat private space. So the space was designed so that it's password protected in terms of seeing those conversations. Also because sometimes we're talking about our own insecurities or our own students, we wanted it to be open to the faculty who were teaching the program. But when we started thinking about design, we went through a lot of different possibilities, and what we ended up with was, as you can see, something that had a kind of comic appeal, partially because, again, we were trying to invite people in. I kept sending emails to the faculty saying, would you please come to a session? We're going to photograph faculty and then try to use, Bill, who designed this for us, was going to draw pictures or adapt it for the site. I promised people that they wouldn't be recognizable. So that person there in the brown coat looks nothing like Rico. The person in the middle looks nothing like Omar, the other one looks nothing like Nick, and of course they did look pretty recognizable. Even the person who we kind of roped in the middle piece there wasn't part of our program, but was unfortunately standing in the hall when we needed another person. So she's part of it. But it was the reason the program handbook doesn't have someone is that they kept saying, since I'm the director, I should be there. And I kept saying, if there's a likeness of me, it'll look like Lenin or Castro or some face of the program that would discourage faculty from feeling quite free to come to visit. I didn't want the sort of sense that, because as you'll see, we carried that over to each page. When you go to the program handbook, that graphic carries over. So we wanted some sense in each picture that in the faculty forum, this is a place for conversation and sort of open discussion. In the middle, we played with ideas of, we had Bill photograph the file cabinet again and again and again, thinking what we really wanted was a kind of virtual file cabinet where people could drop off good teaching materials and pick up others. But we decided that was really a strikingly undynamic graphic, a file cabinet. And again, I guess the idea of the coffee mug with some smoke coming out was, even if there's no individual there, someone is about to come back or just left.
And I think what Lad was talking about is a little bit, my background before I taught was in, I did internet work, and so before I went and got my graduate work, started teaching, I did a lot of web design and looking at what that means to a user. So we did a lot of conversations talking about just what are the graphics going to involve. If you think about, it looks very, we could have just turned it over to Bill or Tim and said, just create some graphics for us. But if you look at the program handbook that Lad was talking about, when Lad so grudgingly didn't agree to put his face on it, we were like, well, what do we put there? We need a graphic to draw people in to click on it. And it was very carefully thought out that there would be a laptop, that there would be a notebook and a pen. And these little decisions are sort of some of the conversations we had. In terms of pedagogy, writing isn't just, rarely do students go to a notebook and pen and sit down and write in their dorm rooms or the library for an hour. They're really working on their laptops, so it was important for us to have that, but also, like Vlad said, the coffee cup. I mean, that was Tim's idea.
And I think we mentioned these sort of process conversations because they are, the thing about this kind of site is it's only really half about the site. It's also about thinking about the identity of the program. And so the other part we spent a lot of time wrestling with was the categories. And I think if you think about any discipline, a lot of people make their careers trying to define what are we talking about, what are the categories we're working with. And I remember working with the honors program folks a while back, and we went around in circles about how are we going to define, what are the major categories and keywords we're using. And these things are very loaded, and they also allow you to sort of get at what's really important to you as a program. And so I think, there are some technical aspects of this, and there are graphic design aspects, but they're also just thinking about who are we as a program and how can this site reflect that and reinforce the identity of the program, because they shouldn't be separate issues at all.
Maybe Tim, a quick example of what Tim's talking about. We spent a lot of time, and we're still working this, trying to decide how much information we want to ask a teacher to give us when she posts a teaching idea in that middle column. Someone comes up with an exercise that works great, and she says, I'll pass it on to the site. And we have now a possibility where she can answer 4 or 5 different questions about where that ought to go. Is it an exercise or an assignment? She could annotate it. She could talk about how it worked. There are a lot of subcategories. And we were torn between saying the more information we could get a teacher to give, the easier it would be for the person to retrieve it at the right moment. On the other hand, the more information we asked, the less likely some people might be to post if it felt like there was a lot of machinery to get through to do it. So we have a lot of options there where someone can post something without giving us much information, and we'll just go into a general list like you saw before, or to list quite a bit of information, which makes it much more usable. We're also trying to work on how we could, as editors, provide some of that information to code it if the teacher chooses not to do it or doesn't have time to do it.
So part of it is the two usability issues, getting it in easily, and then getting it out easily on the other end, finding stuff as you go along. We had to wrestle with sort of balancing both of those. And I just want to mention that the third section here, the program handbook, is basically a kind of, presents the basic information about the program and how to get other resources. And that's something that the program director and so forth can this will be less interactive in the other parts, but it would allow it allows faculty to present that information and in a way that's clear for people who are coming in. Just going to pause for a second, please.
One other thing while Tim's doing that, I'll say too, is that we've been working on how to have these 3 pieces of the site work together so that if a student or a graduate student teaching posed a question like, what do you do if a freshman has disappeared for 2 weeks? Do you immediately contact the dean? Do you send an email to the student? Do you talk to the program director? We now have had a lot of conversation on the faculty forum about how different people have handled it. We're also trying to develop official protocol. So we're trying to find links so that somebody could say, here's the question, actually that's answered in the frequently asked questions, and link within the faculty forum from one direction to the other.
The other thing that we're trying to do is put a human face to some of these people who are valuable resources around campus. And we've had a list of all these different resources, but we're trying to take advantage of the ease of putting audio and video online, and this is just a sample of what we'd like to have for each of these for Tom McGinnis and for LAD and other people who are part of the program, to give them a chance to just talk about what they're doing there. And so this eventually will be quasi talking about what he does.
The student is proving to their professor that they did a lot of work, and it's also getting them to be very truthful about.
So that's going to allow especially the new people to know who are these people, and do it in a slightly more animated way, so that they can connect the names to the faces they go through. Fortunately, that gets easier and easier all the time to produce those kinds of audio video resources. I just want to walk you through a few elements of the site so you get a sense of how it works before we open it up for questions. And on the front here, you can see that it's a blog-like interface. New stuff shows up at the top and gets pushed down. You can see that there lists what the comments are, if there are any, and it's color-coded to match, so you know that this is a faculty forum topic. This was one that was recently posted, and there's a kind of discussion going on here that gets listed below the initial post, so that people can have a conversation there. And the teaching resources also show up on the home page. If you weren't logged into the site, you wouldn't see these faculty forum topics, by the way, because as Lavin was saying, we want to keep that somewhat private. But teaching resources are available to the public so long as doesn't have content attached that has some copyright restriction with it. So here we can see, here's a video that I grabbed off the web because it seemed appropriate to the kinds of teaching we're trying to do.
Yeah, actually, it's presentation ready. Why don't you do a presentation? Because I really want, honestly, my goal is for you to know, so that you can communicate with the people here, to your clients, to whomever. Okay. Well, it's whoever, not whoever. To whoever. Whoever is never actually right. No, sometimes it's right. Michael is right. It's a made-up word used to trick students. Now, actually, whoever is the formal version of the word. Obviously, it's a real word, but I don't know when to use it correctly. I know what's right, but I'm not going to say it. Because we're all jerks who didn't come see my band last night. He doesn't know which one's correct. I don't know.
It's who one is the object of the sentence and who one is the subject.
Yeah, that sounds right. Well, it sounds right, but is it? It's an object.
I use me as an object.
Is it right or not?
How do you use it again?
Because I wanted Michael, the subject, to explain the computer system, not object. Go to whomever, meaning us, the indirect object, which is the correct usage of the word.
No one asked you anything ever, so whoever thinks totally, why don't you take the other second news?
I mean, how can our students not learn? But anyway, it just demonstrates the goal of sort of being able to bring things in as they emerge, as they come about, things that you maybe wouldn't run across, but if somebody else is able to grab it. This I put up on the streaming server, so because it's copyrighted material, we're using it in an educational setting. This doesn't show up when you're not logged in. And the idea here is to take this material, take this link, and if you wanted to use it, you bring it into your WebCT site, which is of course also password protected. And so we're trying to be careful about copyright use as much as we can. But with any of this stuff, it's meant to gather all the resources so that people can take it and customize it in their own site. And so you get an idea of the variety of stuff that's here. And if you went to add content in this site, what you did is basically a form with a little WYSIWYG editor that allows you to put in some basic formatting. And there are a variety of tags that you can attach. Some of them are sort of there for you already. Some of them are more open-ended, so if a tag doesn't appear that you want, you can enter it in here. And then you can also attach a variety of media. It could be a YouTube video, it could be an image, you could attach a file, put in a link to something else. And it's designed to make it easy to get that material into the site and available for other people. You can also bring up if you entered a resource and it was connected, say you entered a YouTube video and you had an exercise that went with it, the idea would be to enter those as separate entries so that then you can people could bring up all the essays on David Sedaris essays if they're interested in that, and then it would also link to any assignments that use those resources.
I just wanted to add something about this forum. This is exactly what Vlad was talking about in terms of we're doing some compromises on usability and what we need on the programmatic end versus what we need on the technical end. Because on the technical end, you want to have lots of things like tags so that obviously when somebody searches for argument, they can come up with lots of assignments. But we don't want it to be heavy on programmatic side in terms of somebody going through and adding tags to whenever someone adds new content. But those tags are really going to help people who are trying to look for something specifically. So we're trying to hit a nice compromise between what we need to make the site strong and full and taking on our archives and building our archives, and yet also I want to just go in there and add content really quickly. I don't want to have to go through all these, and I think the way Tim has set this up is great.
One other compromise that we're trying to make, and a balance that's really delicate, is on the one hand we want to invite teachers, including new teachers, to post teaching ideas and feel as if they're not only taking ideas from the site but contributing to the building of that archive. On the other hand, these are people, as I said before, in many cases have never taught, and so sometimes assignments will come in that the more experienced teachers will have some questions about. Does this really make sense? Or as Tim said before, is there any way you could do this within a 50-minute class, or is this even within the parameters of the course or the philosophy of the program? So it's a tricky and sort of delicate balance. We've thought a little bit about annotating those, although we certainly don't want an annotation which would say something like, ignore this assignment, it doesn't work. This person's never taught before. But at the same time, we do feel some responsibility as editors of the site to try to post materials that we think would be useful to new teachers. So some of what we've been talking about is do some face-to-face work with teachers who submit assignments to think about, is there a way to craft this, revise this, or contextualize or frame it that might make it work better within, again, the time constraints and the philosophy of the program. To this point, we've been probably erring on the side of being more democratic and inclusive and inviting in whatever responses people want to give, and maybe thinking of that divide between the three categories as a way to speak to that problem, which would be what becomes official program recommendation or policy versus what's on the table as a kind of discussion.
So I think the goal is to, right now we have sort of a site, you end up having a site and you have your program, but the goal is to really get those things to seem seamless. Like it's not you have this extra thing that people have to do. You really want to bring that together into a single place so that, it's site and program, and eventually it's just the program. It's like students don't think of Facebook and then their social life. It's all one seamless whole, and they just use it. It's an extra tool, and it's really valuable and a part of how they find information and socialize. And so what we really, we've gotten the site basically up and running, but we're trying to now think about programmatic things like how do you get those things, how do you get the site and the program to work together? Some of it's just making it the basic place for information. It's where you go. It brings people there for the basic stuff about the program. We're also trying to integrate it into the teacher training part of the program, which is the EN 825 composition. What's it called? Theory of
Composition theory of the teaching and writing is a required course for graduate students the year before they begin teaching.
And so this would become part of a cycle especially for the teaching fellows, where they would start using it when they're looking to build their syllabus, and then during their first semester they would go in and comment on things that they've used, and by the next semester, spring semester, they'd be in a position to start submitting things that they thought worked well, some of their best assignments. And so that way we have a kind of cycle of submission that goes throughout the year. And I think the idea would be to have a moderator, like a grad student, who will be in charge of just keeping track of the site and at strategic points, getting people to submit things, holding workshops. In the spring we're going to have some parties, posting parties, just get people into a room and get their stuff in and help them figure out how to do it. And that way, because you have the site there, people won't necessarily use it. So we really, half of the battle is getting the site up, but really half of it is also the kind of programmatic stuff and the human face that goes along with it. And that's what we're working on right now to really fill out for the next year. And for those of you who are wondering, we are using an open source application called Drupal, which IT is also using these days for some of their new projects. And we've decided to use it instead of WebCT for this kind of project, mostly because it offers some things that WebCT doesn't, namely comments, a robust search feature, and categories that can be that can grow organically, as well as a flexibility in how we try to how we make it look, the look and feel of it. Now, that's not to say that we've also done some of these projects with WebCT and Vista, but they often have a slightly different emphasis and different needs. So it's not really an either or, but we've been using Drupal quite a bit recently for several projects, and we're looking for ways to standardize that in a way that we can create new instances more easily and make it an application that's available to other departments. However, it's not so much, as I was saying, it's not just getting a site up, it's all the other work that happens, gathering material, thinking about categories, thinking about who's going to manage it. There's a whole lot of work that goes into one of these sites. It's a pretty big commitment on the part of a program, and you have to have a conviction that says, this is really going to be a part of who we are as a department, and be able to spend a few years on it. And so we're trying to think about, okay, we've got several pilots that have worked well, but we're trying to think of where this might go in the future in terms of offering it out to the rest of the BC community. So stay tuned on that, and if you are interested in talking with us more, if you think it's relevant for your program, feel free to get in touch with me or one of the other staff members at Instructional Design and Teaching Services. So I guess I want to just open it up for questions now, things that you might be wondering about how Lad and Rico have been thinking about this site or using it, or other things you might have regarding this particular project.
What are your thoughts on maybe having like an anonymous system for people to rate the quality of the assignments that people are putting up?
Yeah, I mean, we thought and talked just a little bit about that. I think in one way it's a really nice way to finesse the problem I described, but in another way I think it still runs the risk of people feeling publicly uncomfortable in a way that I don't think I want to risk. So I think it's a good suggestion, and yet, as we sort of carried around, we were worried that even an anonymous negative review, I suppose if they were posted,
or like a starring system,
right.
4 versus 5.
Well, one of the issues I think, I've been talking a lot about the inexperience of the faculty, and I want to make sure I also say that we have an enormously committed and intelligent group of graduate students teaching this course, and we're lucky for that. At the same time, most of them are feeling pretty overwhelmed teaching this course. It's a really difficult course to teach, the first year course. Arguably the most difficult course in our department to teach in terms of the range of students. It's a required course, so there aren't students, as are in the upper division writing courses, who've signed up because they necessarily want to take it. It's a course that the subject matter is always changing because students often get to produce and generate their own topics within those assignments. And so it's a very difficult course for teachers to teach, and I bring it up because I think there is a high level of insecurity on the part of the faculty. For some good reason. They're teaching a college course the first time in a field that they didn't specialize in. They came to study literature primarily, not composition. And this is where we need them in terms of material needs. But for all those reasons, I think they're nervous to put themselves out there in a way that might be too heavily scrutinized or critiqued. And so we're often inviting them to participate in the conversations. It may just be that some of the teachers with lots of experience will stay away a little bit from that middle column to the end of the year, when they think, okay, I've been through a year and I have more confidence about what worked. But it is an interesting suggestion to think, is there some way that teachers could respond that would still not make people who post it feel inhibited or uncomfortable?
And I think it works well, starring works well on a huge site like Amazon, where it's very impersonal, and, if you don't get a lot of stars, nobody really cares. But, if in a smaller program, people might feel self-conscious when people come and see, that person has no stars or 1 star or something. It sounds kind of silly, but, teaching, it makes people feel, it's very intimidating and unnerving and a lot of things, especially as a young teacher, that may make you not want to participate or not feel welcome. And we want people, we're trying to encourage some of the inexperienced teachers to figure out what maybe 2 or 3 of their best assignments that worked. And that's all they really need to submit. If we got 2 or 3 really good assignments from people every year, we have a great, really great collection of stuff. And I think it's also the flip side of that is encouraging them not to feel like they have to reinvent the wheel as a new teacher. They don't have to come up with original assignments or syllabi for the course that they're teaching from scratch. I think I felt like that if I didn't come up with innovative stuff for every assignment, every session, that somehow I was inadequate. And it's a real burden actually to feel that way, especially the first semester.
Right.
So I think making them feel like it's a collaborative project, you're in a community where people are sharing stuff, and that's okay, I think takes a lot of pressure off, allows them to work with material that's already been used and modify it and tweak it, but not feel the pressure of coming up with new stuff all the time.
Right, and the pressure might also, we've also talked a little bit about whether some of that insecurity will come up in the faculty forum. They're talking to other teachers, but they're also talking to their supervisors. We have teaching mentors in the department, and I direct the program, and I'm on the site, and so we try to create an environment where people feel I can talk about insecurities or problems without fear of being embarrassed or fatigued.
Well, I disagree with that a little bit. What about student involvement and really making an impact with the students, and what's the quality, what assignment really generated a lot of discussion or a lot of excitement or a lot of enthusiasm? I know certain things that I've tried in the classroom that inspired more energy than other ones, and that's what I go off of, rather than, and I obviously want to share it with my colleagues, but, I learn more, I learn just as much from the students as I learn from other teachers or other people.
Yeah, I wonder if then maybe if you're posting something, part of your responsibility would also be to go in and comment on it, your own post, your own teaching resources after you've taught it a couple of times and say, I taught it a second time, it didn't work very well in this class, and try to, I think that's where those comments are really useful to get a variety of, because some students, somebody may use the same assignment in another course and may not work very well at all because of their particular class and those kinds of things. Is that the kind of thing you're thinking about?
Well, but even to your forum, in your community, you may want to include other students who are on the receiving end of that.
Oh, I see.
To have students be part of the discussion.
Pardon me?
To have students be part of this discussion.
Yes, and you may use, students from the Lynch School, in your sort of test or something. I don't know, or, if they were in the class or sit in and you make it a little experimental that way as they observe what was effective and what wasn't effective. I think don't miss that piece of the dynamic, in the teaching. There's always a teacher.
Well, yeah, but with the new systems of evaluation, teachers do get a lot of feedback from students, and I wouldn't want to say that's not valuable. I'm just not sure, or maybe there's a way to have both be part of this site. Again, just speaking to when we piloted it, what certain teachers said about what they'd be willing to say was things there and not. So it's not instead of it, but as another space. Yeah.
Here we have time for one more question. Anybody else? Yeah, Mary Jo.
Could you describe a little more fully or show an example of the common part of the teaching resources? I'm trying to get the difference between that part and the faculty forum.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of comments on the teaching resources yet because we're still getting material in. People haven't been in enough to go comment. But it would show up if we go out here. I can show you what it looks like anyway. If somebody like Ladd had a pretty insightful comment on this one. So here's the resource, and then the comment is from Ladd. Right now there's not much there because we haven't, it hasn't been out there. But it would be something about I use this clip and it worked well to illustrate this point, or I used it in combination with this other assignment, and it's basically just a kind of record of how people have used it.
And people comment on the comment?
Yeah. So it becomes like technically it's the same thing as the discussion forum in terms of how the comments show up and they can be threaded and all that stuff. But it has a slightly different emphasis because it's more centered around a teaching resource and saying, let's talk about this particular video, let's talk about this particular exercise, whereas the discussion forum is more about, here's a problem or a challenge that I'm thinking about. What do you do if somebody doesn't show up for class for 2 weeks? People may go on and have a discussion about that, but it's a sort of a teaching-related issue or question rather than just a particular exercise.
Another analogy you might think of is on Amazon. These are more objects, and that's a sort of language that Tim has shared with us. And so the teaching resources are: here's an assignment, here's an essay that's great, and then you comment on it where you say this worked well. Just like in Amazon, you'd say I love this book or I hated this book, and the discussion is more. Here's an event, like for example, I posted something about the knapsack of white privilege, the Peggy McIntosh lecture, and I was like, well, I'm going to send my students, and here's the kind of writing prompt I want them to think about, and then other people would talk about that in terms of the comments.
I think my favorite analogy is allrecipes.com, where somebody posts a recipe, but then you think that, there's too much salt. So then you go in and you post, you say, I thought this was great, I gave it 4 stars, but use less salt and, use include chicken rather than
You got a quick question?
Yeah, are you guys keeping data on the social effects of using this?
Not
In
yet.
other words, has it generated more human contact or reduced it?
Yes, a little early.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you thinking maybe it'll generate more or less? Take the place of some face-to-face?
I wonder if you could ask people
Yeah.
annually.
Yeah.
That's
I know
one
it's
of our concerns.
right. In a way, we never thought it would, and never wanted to take the place of too much of it. We continue, for example, to have staff meetings. We continue to have mentors assigned to work one-to-one with new teachers. And I don't think this will take the place of that, or should, but it's a great question. I
It
don't know.
might generate.
It might generate more.
I think it's like Facebook, where people, it just kind of greases the wheels in getting them together and doing things. There's also, I think it's unlikely that people would say, I'd rather not get together, let's just hang out on Facebook. I think that it's not, they work together in ways that I think we'll find that out as we go along, but it's a good thing to ask about, because it's still very much a work in progress, and there's a human factor here that's we're still waiting to get that data on.
I feel sort of like the UPS, but I don't know how to really phrase this question. I think it's fabulous. It's something that I think you might like to look at. What are you talking about in terms of cost, cost, and human resources cost?
I don't know. Yeah, it's a great question.
Well, the first year A program received a faculty summer workshop grant to do this project, and so there was an allocation of some money, a few $1,000s, for that. There's also some just human time to work on it.
Sure, training.
And we're still trying to figure out a model for going forward of how we would support this in the long run. And it's hard to sort of quantify exactly how many hours, because it is time consuming. But there's a lot of work that the program has to do in thinking about its own. It ends up being a lot about who do we think we are as a program, how is this going to fit into the workflow and to the sort of way we relate to people. So, I think that it also evolves over years. I think we'll only really see the benefits in another year or so when we have more content in. And so it does take some commitment to say we want this to be a part of the program, and it's going to grow. I think it's going to grow quickly, but so I think it's a little bit hard to be very precise about that. But we can certainly talk about that, and I think we're at a point where we're trying to consolidate the projects we've done, figure out what the best practices are, figure out what we've learned, and still figure out where we might go with it long term. Because I think it's an open question based on the resources we have and so forth. So, but I think we're learning a lot about how people, programs relate to sites like this, because there's a lot of interesting dynamics there, and I think we'll be learning a lot in the next year. So feel free to be in touch if you want to talk more.
Thank you.
That's a great note to end on, I think, both the work that's involved in So thank you to our presenters and to all of you for coming. And we will see you hopefully at our next eTeaching Luncheon event in the spring.
Thanks for coming.